Infinite Crisis, I remember reading when I was a teenager, and it was very confused. Very, very confused. And then I decided to follow up with Final Crisis and even more confused. And at that point, I was just like, I'm not going to bother trying to understand these big maxi series anymore.
Infinite Crisis only makes sense if you read like all the tie-ins, including Day of Vengeance and what's the other one? Villains United and all of this other ancillary stuff.
And I assume as well, if you make sure to have paid like minute attention to even the smallest panels in Crisis on Infinite Earths, then you make sure to, like, maybe then you'll understand it a bit better as well.
No, because it's kind of infamous for creating the Red Skies crossover, which I referenced last time.
Okay.
Which essentially means that when the sky turns red in Crisis on Infinite Earths, that happens in all of the DC books, because almost every DC book got its continuity reset. But some of the writers just didn't care. Like, some of the writers said the characters go, oh my god, the sky's turning red. Anyway, back to chasing the Penguin. Like, that was it.
Was that what Batman was up to? Yeah. Well, yeah, that's my other question, is that this was the big universe reset where they take all of the multiverses and condense them down into a single universe with a single continuity. But the story takes place in real time. And also the story was released issue to issue over the course of almost a year. What the hell was going on with all of the other stories in all of the other comics single issues that were going on? Did they just stop? Or did they carry on? How do you, like, if you're a writer and all of a sudden you just get it thrown on your desk that, by the way, that we're resetting the entire universe next June, and you've got like plans for long form stories that are going to carry on, you've been setting things up, what do you do?
Leave your book, as Marv Wolfman soon found out, because a lot of writers and artists weren't very happy with it.
Well, yeah, because that's the thing, is I opened this very nice Eagle Moss collection edition of
Out of print?
Yes, and one of the first things it says is that Marv Wolfman, he wanted to write a story where it brings all of the characters together in one big story. And it doesn't mention anything to do with the multiverse reset, restarting the continuity or anything like that.
It was originally called The History of the DC Universe, which was then the follow-up two-parter series in 1987, which he did as a sequel. He reused the title for it.
Oh, okay. So, and it also that he spent like 5 years researching all of the characters in the DC universe so he could make sure that everybody is fit into the story properly and that everybody gets their moment to shine. And I've got to say, I had some major, this might just be because I read it all in one day, I had some major problems reading through this story because it is a slog.
Okay, it does require like multiple read-throughs, I think, and to be steeped in continuity. In terms of our reputation for controversial takes, I will say today, finally, after quite a few months, we are discussing two books that I actually really like, particularly Legends. I think Legends is great.
Legends, I'm going to agree with you. I'm really enjoying it. Crisis, we might have butt heads here a little bit, but let's carry on. Let's carry on.
All right. So to outline some of the context of Crisis. So it's written by Marv Wolfman and co-plotted and penciled by George Pérez, R.I.P. Now, the pair began working at DC together because they relaunched Teen Titans with the new Teen Titans in 1982. I think that's the correct year, and I should get that right because I absolutely love that series. And it's of note because that became the top-selling DC book for multiple years. When every other comic was selling like 60,000 to 90,000 copies a month, New Teen Titans was selling between 200 and 400,000 and actually out-competing Uncanny X-Men, which was the top-selling title at the time. So they were battling Chris Claremont for like top spot on all of the comic selling charts.
Can you imagine if the comics industry was getting those kinds of numbers today?
Yeah, well, they could just not be gay race communists and actively insulting their readership.
Well, just to butt in very, very quickly, to interrupt, on that subject, I was in Manchester over the weekend, and I went to, there are two comic book shops in Manchester. They're both incredibly gay, but they're comic book shops. So I put my head through. One's Traveling Man, and one is Forbidden Planet. And my God, you will notice when you go in there, the Western comics section in most comic book shops these days is a shelf. It's a shelf. Forbidden Planet there used to have an entire wall that was all of the latest Marvel and DC omnibus that had been released, and then loads of different shelves across the second half of the shop that were covered in hardcovers, trade paperbacks, and a big wall covered in all of the newest single issues. That's gone. Most of those walls are now covered in Funko Pops. Oh boy, amazing. There's 2 or 3 shelves with some Western comics, and Marvel and DC take up maybe a shelf and a half, and the rest is Image and Dark Horse. The rest of the shop is manga. The rest of the shop is manga. Same with Traveling Man. They've got a wall where they've got 2 shelves that are split pretty finely with DC, Marvel, Image, Dark Horse. The entire rest of the shop is either models or manga. Manga has overtaken it to such a ridiculous degree. And I wonder if the gay boys running Traveling Man, it's got pride flags, it's got trans flags, it's got non-binary flags in there. They know what they're doing. If they put all of these up, I wonder if they ever think to themselves, if they ponder why it is that all of the manga, which doesn't include any of that rubbish, is outselling all of the Western comics, which do include all of that. Why aren't we stocking single issues of gay Batman anymore? Why aren't we stocking single issues of Superman's gay son anymore? Anyway, pride flags.
Hans, are we the baddies?
Yeah.
Like,
do these cross people's minds?
I really don't think so. Or if it does, it's in a very mute way, because the entire project of Pride is to suppress the screaming conscience of the person adhering to it by making everyone around them affirm themselves. And it's really sad as well, because not that modern comics are anything of value, not anything since 2018 has been all particularly of note, but after Crisis, a kind of reinvigoration of the golden age happened with DC, because you had loads of great creators really impassioned about the lost but not forgotten continuity of the characters, came along to revitalize titles like George Perez on Wonder Woman, Wolfman and Perez still on Teen Titans, John Byrne on Superman. You had Batman Year One created by Frank Miller immediately after Crisis happened. So you had some really great stories.
I love Year One. That's one of my all-time favorite Batman stories, and I can go back to that every time and go, yep, still as good as I remember.
Yeah, and that was the spirit of Crisis, which I think, even though there are some spotty moments in its storytelling, especially considering it was meant to be 10 issues and they dragged it out to 12.
It drags.
It does it has a bit of a Jason Voorhees of where he just won't stay down. But anyway, point being, there is a funny story about Marv Wolfman as well. So Marv Wolfman has had a massive impact on the entire comics industry because he accidentally caused creators to start getting credited for comic books. So it's because of his surname, his very unorthodox surname, right? Due to the Comics Code Authority, which we spoke about in the History of Comics series, depictions of things like vampires, ghosts, and werewolves were prohibited. So Jerry Conway, who worked at Marvel and DC in January 1970, was writing a story for House of Secrets number 83. And he wanted the main character, Abel, so Cain and Abel have House of Secrets, House of Mystery. I think it's in Neil Gaiman's Sandman, if I'm correct.
It's been a while since I've read Sandman.
It's probably wise. The narrator, Abel, wanted to say he heard a story from a wandering wolfman, as they were going to talk about werewolves. But instead, he put Wolfman, spelling it with Wolfman's name. And so to get away with it, he thought, I have to credit him for the story on the next page. So it's written by Marv Wolfman, is emblazoned on the page. And every creator in that book started going, hang on a minute, if he's getting a credit, why don't I get credits? And so that became the default norm for most books to start crediting their writers, artists, colorists, inkers, and editors.
So in the older issues, would you just not get, because in this, for instance, or Legends, you get the little panel at the bottom of maybe a splash page that says written by, inked by, drawn by. Was that just not in those older issues?
Often not in DC. It was commonly in Marvel because Stan Lee used to make up like fantastic nicknames. Like Jack the King Kirby came from Stan Lee crediting his artists. But in DC, wasn't very common. Like lots of the issues just went uncredited. Especially think about the older Batman issues where it was Batman was created by Bob Kane and nobody else.
Yeah, I suppose so. I suppose that does explain it, because I have gone back through some old issues of comics in the past and been confused as, wait, who wrote this? Who drew this? What's going on? I'm so confused.
Yeah, quite. And I'm glad the creators now do get proper credit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Wolfman, Neil Adams have done great stuff.
And now in the modern comic era, we know who to blame.
Quite. Tom King. So it was announced at the New York Comic Convention in 1981. And as I said, it was originally titled The History of the DC Universe, but it became Crisis on Infinite Earths to condense the entire and confusing DC multiverse down to one cohesive continuity to give a new jumping on point for brand new readers. And it worked because the John Byrne Man of Steel run, the Frank Miller's Batman run, Wonder Woman, all saw the sales tick up because they were much easier to get involved.
And these are all now considered, when people look back on the 80s comic industry, as being classics of their time, or at least certainly like series that you have to check out.
Yes, they're the seminal particular starting points for many of the characters, and they're indistinct from continuity. It wasn't the first Crisis, though, and this is something that we mentioned before. So there were a few crises. They actually bore that name throughout DC history. There was Flash of Two Worlds, So that was Flash 123, first time the multiverse was acknowledged, Jay Garrick and Barry Allen meeting, and they were comic book characters in each other's respective realities. Then Justice League of America 21 and 22 was Crisis on Earth 1, which established that Earth 2 had the Justice Society and Earth 1 had the Justice League. There were annual crossovers between the JSA and the JLA after that. And then there was Crisis on Earth Prime, not long before this, which united the Justice League, the Justice Society of America, and the All-Star Squadron to fight, I think it was Earth 3's Crime Syndicate and Pedegaton or something like that.
So were the crises not only universe-wide crossovers, but also consistently attempts to streamline and clarify things?
They
in
were
the
more like
continuity?
annual fun team-ups across 1 or 2 titles. So you'd have like 2 issues of Justice League, 2 issues of Justice Society, and you'd read one then the other, run one then the other. It would run for 2 months, and it would be a once-a-year fun thing. It wasn't, let's kill half the DC universe at once. Which, ambitious, I'll certainly give them that. And then DC Comics Presents 78, which Wolfman wrote, was a lead straight into Crisis on Infinite Earths. He also wrote DC Comics Present Annual 1. Sorry, I think he only wrote the annual, which was Crisis on 3 Earths, which had all of the Supermen teaming up as they do here, because you've now got Earth 2 Superman, Earth 1 Superman, and Alexander Luthor Jr. from Earth 3. So you've got a lot of characters to juggle with the same names as well, which makes this quite confusing to read the first time.
I do think the art helps differentiate it, the way that Earth 2 Superman, just having him be a little bit bulkier with the white strips of hair around his ears, helps to differentiate. So George Perez did a good job in visually differentiating the characters.
Wolfman and Perez were experts at team books, and so he could create a very crowded scene or splash page with 50 heroes there, and you could easily pick out which one is which. And you could probably name them all if you had sufficient level of
if you had the encyclopedic knowledge that Wolfman, apparently according to this intro, made sure that he had before going into it.
I certainly will credit him with that. Now, leading up to this as well, he'd created the character of the Monitor, who's the central power broker on the side of the heroes, but through the last few years of DC, he was financing all of the villains, so it got quite confusing. And he first conceived the Monitor, Wolfman said when he'd written this, about 18 years ago, and he called him the Librarian because he didn't have a very good sense of names, he said. And he wanted someone to finance all the villains. But then it's revealed, per a conversation between Monitor and Harbinger in the comic, that he was doing so to test which heroes and which villains were optimum to put together as a team to defeat his counterpart, the Anti-Monitor, when he knew inevitably he would return and try and destroy the multiverse. But Monitor had shown up in things like New Teen Titans 21, which is his first debut, which Wolfman and Perez both wrote. They roped him into a few Green Lantern issues, 173 through 178, and then Batman the Outsiders 14 and 15, where behind the scenes he's pulling the strings and making life difficult for the heroes. But it's some sort of crucible to ensure that the people he has on side are adequate to fight them. And the deaths this produces, among them, there's quite a few, but some of the notable ones are, of course, the Anti-Monitor, destroyed by Earth 2 Superman, but then resurrected in Blackest Night, and also Sinestro Corps War by Green Lantern. There's something on Jeff Johns later.
This is the guy you want to bring back to life. I'm sure it makes sense in the story, question mark.
Basically, because the Anti-Monitor controls the antimatter universe, in order to get Yellow Lantern rings, Sinestro needed the Thunderers who work for the Anti-Monitor. So he resurrected the Anti-Monitor to command their loyalty and folded him into the Sinestro Corps War. But then he gets killed again, but then Necron of the Black Lanterns brings him back and uses his body as a Black Lantern power battery. Yeah, quite.
I'm sorry.
I don't blame you. Jeff Johns' Green Lantern is a good run, though. So Dawn Hall dies, is replaced by Dawn, who's the female Hall eventually. Matt Hagen's Clayface dies, which makes it really confusing for Batman continuity.
One thing that I did pick up that there's about 4 or 5 pages dedicated to, and then is dropped, is that Wildcat becomes paralyzed from the legs, from the waist down, and then Latoya Montez, I think her name is.
Yolanda, I think it is.
Yolanda, yeah. American black woman name.
She's Hispanic.
Still. Becomes Wildcat instead, and an issue ends on that, like it's some big reveal, like it's a big cliffhanger. She's going to be so important, and then she shows up in maybe 2 or 3 more panels in the rest of the story.
Yeah, she gets killed off in 1994 in an obscure book, because if you ever played the Telltale games, you know when you make the wrong decision in the top right-hand corner of the screen that says, and everyone disliked that? That was basically the attitude to crippling Ted Grant and then replacing him with Yolanda, because nobody cared for that legacy character. It wasn't a good decision. Yeah. One legacy character people did like is actually Wally West, because he takes over as the Flash because Barry Allen dies. He dies. He does not disappear into the Speed Force, Grant fucking Morrison, okay? Because that was the retcon in Final Crisis. In this, you see him disintegrate into a skeleton and he loses his costume. And then in Final Crisis, Barry pops out the Speed Force, fully clothed, like, Wally, take my hand. No, you were dead. Wolfman said you were dead in an interview he did last year. Ridiculous. No, not having it. And then Huntress, the crime syndicate, Julia, as Alfred's daughter, disappears. Solovar, Supergirl of Earth 1.
Alfred had a daughter?
Yeah, Julia Pennyworth, yes.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Pre-Crisis Batman continuity. All of these people get eliminated by Crisis on Infinite Earths. You can kind of see the necessity to condense it down a little bit. Also, Superman, Wonder Woman, Captain Marvel, Captain Atom, and a bunch of other characters were rewritten and reincorporated into the DC universe, with Wonder Woman now showing up midway through DC's history. Contentious decision to do so, but there you go.
Yeah. Also, I've got to say, I was under the impression, I read this when I was a teenager, so I'd forgotten most of the story of it and how it led into the rest of the DC universe continuity-wise going forward. I was given the impression, certainly by Grant Morrison's Animal Man run, which we covered last time, and from my own impressions of the other series that we'd looked at that related to post-Crisis DC, that all of the characters, except for Psycho Pirate, didn't remember the events of Crisis. But at the end of this, it seems that the characters who were involved at the Dawn of Time incident, where they go to confront the Anti-Monitor at the Dawn of Time, everybody, and there was quite a few, probably about 100, if not slightly more, heroes who went to confront him, all of them have memories of the pre-Crisis multiversal continuity, which is why Earth 2 Superman and Earth 1 Superman can meet up and discuss how they remember it, and Jay Garrick, they can go to visit him, and he remembers it, but his wife doesn't remember it. But I was under the impression that all of their memories were reset except for Psycho Pirate. So is that just a part of this plot that was kind of discarded? Because at the beginning of Legends, Wally West references the events of Crisis. So the continuity, I'm confused.
Valid point. Basically, he had intended for all of the heroes from the Dawn of Time to remember the continuity from before, so they could retain some of their friendships and relationships. But then in some of the reboots, that is forgotten. For example, Batman and Superman get reintroduced, and for the next few years of continuity, they act like they've only just met rather than be friends for a decade.
So that was more of a fault of the people following up this series.
Definitely. Animal Man was not part of the heroes that were at the Dawn of Time, I believe. So that's why the contradictions start breaking his continuity, and that's why Grant Morrison wanted to play with that, because he's part of the group of heroes along with Dolphin and Adam Strange, who encounter Brainiac later on and help involve Darkseid in this. So I think he was outside of that hero group. They didn't get invited to the party. None of the villains remember except for Psycho Pirate, and none of the civilians who are on the New Earth remember, aside from Psycho Pirate. But then this is inconsistently played with. Like, sometimes the spouses of superheroes will reference the Crisis as if they know of it firsthand, but not that they were told of it secondhand. So because characters get chopped and changed between writers and editorial teams, these details get forgotten. Essentially, it was intended to be a consistent streamlining, didn't always pan out that way because creatives do cock up pretty often.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.